Stumble forward, stumble forward. The 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 stumble.
I'd like to welcome Dave Foley to the Stumble Forward. Dave is a comedian, actor, podcaster, director, producer, and writer. He's having a career with many interesting acts, highlights which include being a member of the iconic Canadian sketch comedy group Kids in the Hall, which, of course, had a massive impact on me. His role as Dave Nelson on the sitcom Newsradio, Flik in a Bug's Life, as well as his newest venture, Really, which is a podcast exploring UFOlogy, which rounds out the fullness of his being so damn fascinating. Welcome, Dave Foley.
Hi.
Dave, thanks for this.
Well, thanks. Well, thanks. Thank you. It's a good excuse to just get to see you and talk to you. It's been a while.
It has been a while.
Yeah.
I do look back sometimes with embarrassment that when you came to our apartment there in Hollywood, that I was showing you Dr. Steve Brule videos, but it meant you're just one of the group. And no,
it was fun. That was a fun night. I had a great time.
Dave, when I was thinking about talking to you, of course, I'm the right age to have been so massively affected by Kids in the Hall. I feel like I talk about it a lot on this podcast. This podcast, when I set out to do it, I think I ultimately kind of wanted it to be a podcast about comedy, and maybe even a podcast about how musicians want to be comedians, and maybe comedians even want to be musicians.
Oh, yeah. It's reciprocal. Oh, my God.
What do you think that is?
Because no one's happy about anything ever. So why should comedians and musicians be any different? Well, I think I think a lot of comedians get into comedy just because we can't sing, and we aren't handsome enough for porn. So our damage goes into comedy.
Well, I mean, I look at comedy with, I was raised in a household by a dad who really celebrated comedy and celebrated funny people. And I feel like it was woven into my fabric that funniness is one of the great human attributes that should be celebrated. And for whatever reason, that's one of the dominating vestiges of the way I think my childhood played out and sewed me together in the version of myself that I currently exist in. The other thing about comedy is you can't lip sync comedy, and if people aren't laughing, it means that there's an empirical result.
Oh yeah, that's one advantage of being in a band. You don't know till you finish the song whether or not you're bombing. As a comedian, you know second to second.
Yeah. But I think from my vantage point as a musician, the purity of that is interesting. Of course, I've never bombed like a comedian bombs with that moment-to-moment assessment of how bad things are going.
Well, that's because your songs aren't terrible.
Well, you say I get a 3-minute or 4-minute grace period till I find out anyway. So maybe they were terrible. It's just in those 3 or 4 minutes, I couldn't tell if the audience was feeling that.
Oh, that when you hear, the song didn't kill.
Yeah.
But, I mean, it's a delayed response, but it's there, and I'm sure you've also had that experience of as a musician of people just talking over you when you're starting out.
Yeah, I do. It's funny. I think that's where the comedy part comes into play. I remember after I had been a sort of a known quantity in Canada and Europe, I went to break Australia. And Australians are great music fans, but they're also the same as anybody else in a bar with a singer at the corner of the room. They'd really rather wish you just go away. And I found that when I talked, they quieted down and sort of leaned in for interest's sake. And when I started singing again, they went back to their normally, their regularly scheduled program of yakking between each other. So I was sort of re-galvanized in Australia about 15 or 20 years ago to bring the chat back onto the stage, because for whatever reason, the audience seems, at least to me, to operate with a little more politeness, if that's the word, when I'm talking, and they go back to yakking. I mean, that's not happening in comedy, though. You're not doing stand-up over top of people who are talking, are you?
Well, there's always that element. It's usually not an entire crowd, unless you're really not good at what you're doing. But there's always certainly in stand-up, there's always some people in the room who've been misinformed and believe that that comedians like the audience to get involved, and either through heckling or just commenting on everything. They want to join in, and then you have to exert a certain amount of energy to getting them to shut up, and without losing the rest of the audience. So it's always a balance of how do I shut this person up, without creating sympathy for them.
Man, that's the science of performing. I feel like I talk about that all the time. It's such a fine balance. I liken it to like holding a bat on the, like straight up on the end of your hand. You're always kind of trying to keep it balanced. And that person who's come to the show with a mind that they are going to self-express as their right that's come included in the ticket price is very interesting. That human, that archetype, I'd sure like to sit down with 20 of that version of person just to kind of understand, because I really do think it's you and I have outlets, and it allows us, I think, a certain inner peace. Like I do feel sometimes when I look at other men, squealing their tires out of grocery store parking lots or playing loud music with the windows rolled down, I think it's not so much that we're that different. It's that I have a means of expressing myself has been more or less sanctioned by the greater public, and then these folks just don't have an outlet.
It's true, and it's just, all of those behaviors are ways of saying, look at me, I exist.
Yeah.
Because I think all of us kind of live with that background fear that maybe we don't, that, how do you have it, feel like you're having an impact on the world around you. And sometimes that instinct can be either as an individual or through groups turned pretty ugly,
Are you having an impact? Do you feel that?
Well, I think I've had an impact. I don't know if it's ongoing. It's I think there's things I've done that I know for a fact I have people come up to me and tell me that it's had an effect on their lives, or things that it's made maybe a bad moment slightly less awful, or it's made them feel a little less lonely at times, or that sort of thing. And that's pretty gratifying.
Yeah.
And I also think I'm egotistical enough to look at the world and go, oh yeah, when I see comedy, go, oh yeah, there's a bit of me in that.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. I really actually am. I'm filled with a bit of gladness to know that, because some of the things I was watching and leading up to talking to you, I hear some of the self-deprecating comments come out, and when I consider how long your career has been, and it means that I'm 48 years old and I'm no longer 16 or 17 watching Kids in the Hall in the basement of my parents' house, but I still feel that Kids in the Hall's effect on me is evergreen. It feels like whatever happened on that show that illuminated a spirit of indie, a spirit of go to Toronto, make something by hand and bring it to the world. That stuff that I feel like I learned as part of the package deal of being a fan of Kids in the Hall lives with me as ever present in this moment as it did when I was a teenager. So when you say maybe you had an effect, yes, the Kids in the Hall comes from some decades ago, but I still feel the effect of Kids in the Hall as if it's still happening to me.
Yeah, well, that's nice to hear. And it's, I know there's, that there's comedy that still echoes in my head, and that, I still, I guess as a young man felt a certain sense of identity that came from, the shared comedic tastes with other people I liked, whether it was like Monty Python or SCTV, or even like especially those early days of David Letterman. I mean, that was kind of, those were things that were like bound to community at the time, and I can recognize that Kids in the Hall did that as well, So,
yeah.
and which is nice. It's a really and it's still, even now, like when we did the reboot of The Kids in the Hall, and especially on social media, there was just that even amongst professional TV critics, there was a sense of apprehension and then great relief.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, please don't be terrible.
Yeah.
Oh, please don't be boring old angry men. And then it was like, it felt like The Kids in the Hall still,
Yeah, and it felt like a better reimagined version. It didn't feel like a throwback. It felt, I'm with you. I took my time getting around to watching it for this very reason. I didn't want to have my heroes sullied in the way that we sort of, I think, expect folks who we have a tradition of paying attention to returning with something that is half-baked or less interesting or doesn't come with the sort of the impact. And that just didn't happen with the reboot. It was fantastic. I mean, that in and of itself must be something to lean into a little bit, like feel some pride about.
Oh, great pride. Yeah, no, it was, I think, the fact that, at our age, I'm the youngest and I'm now 60. So when we were making the show, everyone else was in their 60s except me. And I mean, the new show.
Yeah.
And, we didn't want to be just a reference to something from people's past. We wanted to be, the hope was that we still had something unique to us to say, and we were as worried about it, I think, as anyone else, and those worries kind of got calmed when we started sitting in a room together and writing, and then I'm going, oh, these guys are still funny. They still make me laugh.
Right.
So if they're making me laugh, then maybe this is going to work out okay.
I mean, that sounds, there's the equivalent to me is that getting in the studio with my band and feeling that same old, that old-fashioned wind blow in that somehow still tickles you in a way that feels new and exciting. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, and just and of course there's also just a certain amount of with the Kids in the Hall. Whenever we get together, there's a certain amount of self-delusion where we kind of we forget that we're old and we feel like we're still the young punks trying to prove something. That attitude is still there, and it's also that aggression with each other too, which is part of it. Where you have to you kind of have to show up ready to battle, to get your stuff in the show and to get the other guys on board. But at the same time, it's also a place where I think all the five of us all have this experience where the other four guys are the guys that make us laugh the hardest at any point in our lives. So it's a mix of aggression and community, I guess.
I mean, does that mean that due to, as I get a little bit older, I've got the hood up on, my internals, and I'm trying to become a better person incrementally, even if those increments are very, very tiny as I get older. One of the things is I look at my want to be a people pleaser, and when I hear about how, you and the rest of the fellas in Kids in the Hall still grind one another, or maybe are willing to be in a place of discomfort with one another in order to have your comedy piece be put forward. Or I guess what I'm interested in these days as I get older is in a creative relationship, there are days where you don't like the other person. I'm uncomfortable with those moments, but I'm starting to realize that to get to the good stuff, sometimes you have to be in a state of dislike with a long-term creative partner. Is that true?
Well, I think it has been true with the Kids in the Hall, at least. And I've talked to, and I get the impression that was true of, say, Monty Python. Maybe less true of SCTV. But there were conflicts in that group too. I know, from becoming friends with all of those people. But definitely with the Kids in the Hall, there was always, the line between despising each other and loving each other was always very fine. And part of it, I guess, is because we came out of that specific era, that sort of not even post-punk, punk and then post-punk, where the worst thing you could be was boring, And so I think we pushed each other to not be boring and it was always just the idea of don't do what you love. If somebody else did something you love, that's a good guidepost to not do that.
Interesting.
So that was the kind of part of just the group. But then also there was also just it was 5 deeply flawed human beings, all with various scars and childhood traumas, and and we were not, in those days we weren't looking to heal. We were just sort of, that wasn't on our radar, the notion of healing. Right. It was more just, how do we just do something that makes us feel good at the time.
You brought up early Letterman. I often, I've been interviewed enough times and one of the standard questions is, what is the music that inspired you? And of course, the music that inspired me is vast, and I have a long list of things that I love. But I always say very quickly that comedy was as big an influence on especially my lyric writing, obviously, because of the window in on absurdity that a certain gaggle of people in comedy. I cite Gary Larson, early Seinfeld, Dave Letterman, and Kids in the Hall as being my talismen into helping a teenager who is looking at the world going, this whole thing is a big fib. But when I lean into Kids in the Hall, their obsession with uncovering the various absurdities all of a sudden makes me feel very comfortable in my own skin. Are you hearing some of this? Is this ringing through?
Yeah. Well, and first thing that crossed my mind is I'm so glad you include Gary Larson. Because I was talking to a friend of mine a little while ago who's like a fine artist, very successful artist, and the subject of Banksy came up. And I had to say, you know what? I really think Gary Larson is way better.
I think you're right.
Yeah. I mean, but Banksy is just really weak Far Sides for the most part.
I mean, I would also say that, how many Gary Larson books are there? I mean, just in terms of profundity and output, you got to look at Gary Larson as a guy who seemed to be able to hit it out of the park on repeat.
Oh yeah, and to be able to tell a beautiful joke, most of the time in one panel, that's incredible concision.
I feel like the Shark Nerds Run the Projector, as well as Beware of Doug, those two comics, were the two that felt spiritually in line with where the Kids in the Hall were seeing life, and we're envisioning the cleave of absurdity that we're sort of all wandering around, smoke kind of billowing out from the earth on that. Were you reading those things when you were a kid? I don't even know how far back Gary Larson goes. Was it something from the 70s, 80s?
I'm trying to remember when Gary Larson started. It feels like he's always been there, at least in the 80s. I definitely was reading him in the 80s. Yeah. So maybe not in this. I don't think he was around in the 70s, but but then there were other things. I remember as a kid reading like Pogo, which was pretty great too in those days. And of course, Mad Magazine was,
right.
as a kid.
It's funny what you end up having space in your life for. Because I have friends who I deeply admire creatively who have that commonality of having Mad Magazine as being a part of them. And Mad Magazine, as much as I saw it at the grocery store, and a couple of friends I would have leafed through it at their house at a sleepover, it just didn't enter into my world. So it's very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's it's one of those things that it was as a kid, it was just it's all there was.
Yeah.
In terms of something that was satirizing, and more it was more parodying than satirizing. Because I remember reading the Mad Magazine parody of The Way We Were as a kid. And I have to this day never seen the movie. I only know it from the Mad Magazine version. So there's a lot of that, but and it's again like there's stuff that influenced me that maybe I moved on from. Like as a kid, I loved Jerry Lewis. And then got older and went, oh, okay, and then got a little older and went, oh, wait a minute, 10 minutes of every Jerry Lewis movie is genius.
Right.
So there's those influences. Jerry. I got to say, like, I certainly don't seem like someone who's a Jerry Lewis product, but in a lot of ways, I am, because he was one of the first people that made me laugh when I was like 4 or 5 years old.
Did Kids in the Hall know what they were like? I know this is a dumb question, and I feel like I know the answer, but I like asking this type of thing because I'm interested in, like I've already said, I'm glad to hear that you see your resonance in other comedy. I hope that if you ever listen to my music, you go, yeah, I hear some of the effect of Kids in the Hall in this, because you should, because it's there.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I know when I certainly love the wit in your songs.
Well, so I'm guessing Kids in the Hall are not knowingly, connivingly sitting here going, we are the beginnings of the threads of the fabric of a future of comedic thinking. We're the threads in the fabric of the future of even indie thinking. I feel like Kids in the Hall had a lot to do with giving birth to indie spirit, including the opening montage as the moving camera goes down Bay Street and passes by the old Cadillac dealership, and just the sound of the opening theme song feeling kind of rowdy and exciting, dark, mystical. The whole thing gave us a sense that you could leave your rural moorings as a kid and go off to Toronto and hand make stuff like these guys, where I feel like the birth of the indie spirit, I feel, connects almost more closely to the Kids in the Hall than any music product. Is this making sense?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, I'll say to our credit and to our discredit at the same time, like everything that happened to the Kids in the Hall happened through an arrogance and a determination to only do exactly what we wanted to do, there was no plan, there was no strategy for anything that happened, and every single thing that happened for the Kids in the Hall happened just because we were really funny, and that was the only thing, because we certainly didn't have a marketing plan that got us the attention of of Saturday Night Live. It was just, we just kept doing exactly what we liked, and one journalist, a guy named Ray Conologue, wrote a rave review about us, and that got the scouts for Saturday Night Live to check us out, and that led to Al Franken flying up to audition us. And everything just came out of the work. Nothing came out of any kind of business plan. So it was definitely kind of that DIY, a punk ethos to it that we're just going to keep doing. And at the time, we thought, I think when we were starting, we just thought, look, we'll do this until all of us can find jobs somewhere. We didn't think the troupe would last. Mm. And I think it only really lasted because Lorne Michaels came along and sort of said, I'm going to keep you guys together. We were always on the lookout for a chance to get out of it.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Oh, my God, yeah. Still are.
So much Canadian television, from my perspective, it has a feel of the marketing plan coming sometimes before the script is written, and a lot of influence by a very laden it feels like it's been made by committee. It doesn't feel pure in the way you're talking about. I mean, maybe I asked the question about, did you know that you were creating something that would have this lasting effect? Because I'm interested to discuss the idea that the great things that get made in life often are made by accident or in a serendipitous moment that is not supposed to be anything but just a moment between moments, yet something extraordinary happens. And I feel the effect of Kids in the Hall on culture as being something that is difficult to deny. I even wonder with this, what you're saying about Lorne Michaels, if there's not somehow, let's keep these Kids in the Hall guys going because they're keeping the portal to a version of absurdity that's so ahead of its time. We at least need to keep that portal open so that once Saturday Night Live catches up to this, we can start to import some of the stuff these guys are doing. So we need to just keep this open because it's a buffet of newness. Is that something that was maybe?
I think that was something that was. I mean, it really was like, look, when Lorne Mike, like we had Mark and Bruce spent 1 year writing as apprentice writers on Saturday Night Live, and on what is by I think most people's assessment the worst season of Saturday Night Live of all time, the 1985 season. And then, but at the end of that year, Lorne had kept the guys kept coming up on their breaks, and we kept doing shows in Toronto, and Lorne kept hearing from people like Marty Short and Dave Thomas and and Catherine O'Hara that he should check out the troupe, and so he flew up and saw us, and he came up with the idea of, well, maybe there's somebody in this group I can bring down to Saturday Night Live, but after seeing our show at the Rivoli, it was his call. He said, look, I don't want to break this group up, because he thought there was something special about it. I think he probably recognized it more than we did. We knew. I would say that we would, if you had asked us at the time, or even now, we would have told you, yeah, we're the best sketch group in the world. Was our attitude.
Great.
At the time, and we didn't think anyone was funnier than us. I later got to meet people in LA who I realized, oh, they're as good as us, and like all the Mr. Show folks and everything. But yeah, we had great confidence in what we were doing, but we didn't have a vision for it the way I think like Lorne did. Lorne saw what it could be, and so he's the one who decided not to bring like one or two of us down as like feature players or writers, but to do something with the show, and down the road, I think Lorne had to live with people constantly comparing Saturday Night Live to us for a while, which I think Lorne found a little annoying. And
right.
But
like,
then
why can't they be as good as those guys in Canada?
Yeah, there was a lot of that, and then I think a little while after that, we started to see the influence of Kids in the Hall seeping into Saturday Night Live. Especially like around the Will Ferrell, Amy Poehler days. We started going, oh, this show's getting more like us.
Yeah. Sometimes I'll even say it's a feigned humility that goes on in the arts and culture biz in Canada. To hear that you guys thought you were great back when you were young, whether that was just naivete masquerading as courage, which is wonderful because that's why we make the great stuff we do when we're young. But, I've always sort of felt a little out of step even with my community because, I didn't put in all this time and work and effort and thought and focus in what I was doing to sort of just shrug it off someday as, oh, it's not really that much of a thing. Like I set out to make something great every time and believe that it's within the realm of earthly possibility that I can do that. When I hear other confident people talk, or people talk of eras at least of confidence in their creative outputs, I know that my confidence goes up and down. I can sort of sense like it's like its own stock market. Like if my confidence and self-belief is up, it's great. And sometimes miraculous things can happen when your confidence and self-belief are not great. But hearing about a confident punkish group in Canada who were allowed to remain themselves and were fiercely devoted to being themselves gets me all excited. The late 20th century to me was a pretty interesting time. I can look back with a lot of nostalgia because it was when I was forming my, the version of myself that would be the version that's talking to you today. But I still think that era of the late 20th century even though I was a part of it and I can wax nostalgically about it, there's something remarkable going on. This pre-internet era, I always think we believed we were on the cusp of modernity, just bursting out. This was pre-internet. We just thought, at least I did, that the future was here and we were a part of it. But it was still very handmade.
Yeah. Oh no. And like things like, my God, and like indie music, or what started out as indie music became, the dominant, form back in like the 90s. It was like a great, I mean, I have a 20-year-old daughter, and she and all of her friends are really into 90s music, and because it was just a great era in music. I mean, there were things that were related. I mean, like, for the Kids in the Hall, I mean, the soundtrack to our creative output was the Replacements and the Pixies, all this great stuff that was happening in that, in that era, was, I can't, every season of Kids in the Hall, there was a new Pixies album that had to be listened to constantly, and in our club days, that was always the soundtrack in between sketches before we adopted the Shadowy Men as our soundtrack.
I feel like you were just hearing you say that gives me, my gut, a sense about the filtration that was actually happening, and really the filtration that happens in all great art. But here we had 5 great minds, 5 individuals. And the other thing about Kids in the Hall, when I started to think about some of your characters versus some of Bruce's characters or Scott's characters, it wasn't like you were 5 like-minded people, or even that you were that your version of comedy, or even your take or sliver, the tranche of absurdity that you had a particular sort of focus on. You were all very different.
Well, I always said the best Kids in the Hall episodes are episodes where each of us has something in. There's something in that episode that each of us hates.
Right.
And that it's not about we had a general. There was a general agreement that we still have that the other 4 guys are the funniest people . But there was certainly just, huge battles about what we should be doing. And of course, we were young enough to think that every mistake was catastrophic. Every misstep was like, oh, you're destroying everything we tried to build. Was kind of the attitude, as opposed to just, I don't really like that,
Right.
But we also gave each other the freedom to do stuff that we didn't like. It's like there would be, it would be just be that if you could convince like one other guy to like it, you could usually get it done. But there would, it's, where was I going with that?
We're just talking about how individual you all were, like that. There wasn't like a single brand of thought coming from Kids in the Hall.
No, and because if all of us did, Bruce's sort of poetic, comedy, then it would have got pretty tiresome. I think, or if all of it was, silly Kevin and Dave stuff, that would have gotten tiresome. It was the fact that we made room for each other, but also that when you were in each other's pieces, as much as we would fight in the writing of the pieces, and as much as we would also fight in the staging, and we would fight in the editing of things, all of that was always, there was always, and most of the time things got better because of it. But as performers, when you stepped into any of the other guys' sketches, you gave everything to it. You did your best to make it the best possible piece of comedy it could be. And everyone did that. Everyone, like, no one walked through a piece. Everybody just as performers, wanted to give everything they could to every single idea.
I feel in some ways some of the ideas were so risky, so absurd. I know, like, if I'm putting forth an idea that even I only am half buying into. I have to perform at twice the power in order to believe it myself, or to put a version of belief out into the world. Like, I'm guessing there wouldn't have been any other way. You guys couldn't have walked through the kind of comedy we were making because it felt so brand new that in order to get full buy-in from the audience, I'm sure there was a sense you had to have full buy-in from the performance, that you had to perform that stuff as a means of convincing an audience just how good it was. Because I think the other thing with Kids in the Hall and a lot of comedy that comes along that is not completely understood at first is that it's almost like we need a few lessons. We need to read the manual before we get into, because the thinking is going to be absurd enough for some people that just by virtue of having new thoughts in their heads that are conflicting and odd. And I would even say that some of the stuff that you were putting forward make people feel uncomfortable. I know we're living in an era where that is sort of less the pursuit of art, but I still find that as a big part of what you're supposed to be doing as a performer.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I always, as a father, I often tell my daughter, be aware of anything that makes you comfortable. Comfort is not your friend. And it truly isn't. It's not, physically and mentally. Comfort is a dead end. Comfort is sitting on the couch and getting fat and lazy. Discomfort is exercising. Building up your body, and it's the same mentally. If you're just avoiding ideas that, if you're avoiding ideas that make you uncomfortable, or that maybe undermine your sense of right and wrong, or what's true, then you really are mentally just you're a mental couch potato. So it's like I'm always, even now at 60 years old, I get very suspicious of any ideas that make me feel comfortable. Those are the ones I think are those are the ideas that are probably the most dangerous ideas.
Well, sounds like an interesting and almost it sounds like a gift for me to just pivot into the next thing I wanted to talk to you about, which is your newest project. If you don't mind skipping over some decades of your career into
that's all right,
into the Really podcast, because I think what you're doing with Really is fascinating, and it speaks very loudly to me because I've been a part of this thought modality for well over a decade as well, although I keep it to myself because it's
people
risky.
Will treat you like you're crazy.
Yes. Which, when I first heard you talking about your thoughts around UFOlogy on Joe Rogan and in subsequent podcasts, I am, again, seeing you as a pioneer of thinking, even what you and Tom are attempting to do, more or less by being an on-ramp for people who are sort of fresh or brand new into this mode of thinking, is something that I've been even wondering how I bring that into this podcast, because it's a big part of who I am, not just UFOlogy, but esoteric thinking and unexplained things. It's been a personal obsession of mine. And I'm guessing that for those people who haven't invested, who's want to invest in absurdity, I'm trying to understand where somebody like you arrives at this, because I have a fondness for absurdity, but I have a fondness for truth, and truth seems often to be in short supply, or at least a truth that lets my stomach feel rest, or when my internal mechanisms, the one that really knows, when it says this is true, it's amazing what it decides to settle on. So how did you get here?
Well, I think part of it.
Thank you for getting here, by the way.
Oh, well,
Dave.
thank you. And again, I had no idea this was an area that you were interested in, which is typical because, when I started talking publicly, suddenly so many people started coming to me and saying, "Wow, I've had this experience, or I believe this," and
it's a brave thing you did.
And it started just, I think, for me. I mean, it was like a lifelong sort of up and down interest of and wondering if this is true, what's going on. Always kind of underlying. So I guess my way of thinking about it was always, Well, there's too much going on in terms of just anecdotal evidence and and events that can't be explained for it all to be bullshit. There has to be something to this or these phenomena. And I kind of felt the same way about things like ghosts. I thought, well, ghosts persist throughout human history. They permeate all of our literature and art. So there's probably something to it. I don't know what it is. I'm not saying, like, I'm still an atheist who doesn't believe necessarily that we have souls, but I believe that there has to be something that's that persistent. So I had that sense of interest in UFOs throughout life because it's also just a really cool subject, and fun, and and a lot of it seemed silly back, and then about, I guess, a little over 10 years ago, I guess I saw, let's even go further back. I remember the Phoenix Lights happened in 97. That made me sort of, for a moment, go, okay, this is a more serious thing than people are treating it as. Like, this is something that really can't be explained, and the explanations that are being put forward don't hold water. So why, and what, so, and I also looked at, well, why is it that sort of the media will take a very uncompelling explanation and just use that as an excuse to stop talking about something? And that seemed to be the rule. And then a little while after that, the French put out something called the Cometa Report, which was a study done by scientists, police, psychologists, and military about UFO incidences in France. And after their study, they basically published a conclusion, which was that UFOs are real, and that the extraterrestrial hypothesis is the most likely explanation. And I thought, well, that's a pretty big thing for a whole country to say, especially when with a long history of intellectual progress.
Yes.
So it's not like, crazy France, they're always on about something nutty. So I was going, well, that's pretty interesting. And again, it had zero traction in our culture. And then I guess it was like about 10, 11 years ago, I saw a film called Out of the Blue by James Fox. And it was kind of the first really good kind of journalistic documentary that I had seen about UFOs. And it brought up a lot of history of UFOs that I'd never bothered to examine. And it was a lot of interviews with really credible people from military and government, and and scientists. And I thought, well, this is that's where, and learning things like this is before the Tic Tac thing became public knowledge. But this is when he made this documentary. But it was like talking about things like Malmstrom missile base, where basically it was reported, and it's in documents that a huge UFO parked itself over a nuclear missile silo site with 10 nuclear missiles prompt ready to go, and shut them all down, like turned off the guidance systems on all 10 of these missiles, and they couldn't turn them back on until the UFO went away. And I thought, well, these are pretty serious people. The guy who sits in a capsule 60 feet underground waiting to start a nuclear war, or waiting to, engage in a nuclear war, basically sitting there ready to do this, and know that when he goes, next time he travels up 60 feet, there's going to be nothing up there. So these are serious people.
Yeah.
Who are reporting seeing this thing and having this event happen. So that, well, and that movie was full of people like that, and it also, did a pretty good examination of the Phoenix Lights, and and that just got me thinking about it more seriously, and so then sort of diving into it and trying to learn more about it, and thinking more seriously about it, and I guess that same mindset from Kids in the Hall and everything else, where it's basically if someone tells me, this is something you shouldn't talk about.
Yeah.
then I go, oh, that's probably the area to go into then. Like what's a anything that's a taboo becomes interesting on the basis of why is it a taboo, and then I sort of learned things that were even more disturbing, and that is that the taboo about UFOs was deliberately and created, and was deliberately created after a study by the CIA, instituted by the CIA, back in 1952, I think it was, something called the Robertson Panel, that was brought in because one of the things I learned about in that movie is that the White House was and the Capitol building were swarmed by UFOs 2 weekends in a row in 1952. Tracked on radar, visually sighted by air traffic controllers. They were chased by fighter pilots. And
is this Eisenhower era? Is it 52 Eisenhower
52
era?
would be Eisenhower, yeah.
Because he's often cited as sort of, in terms of presidents along history, as one of the ones that must have had some communication or connection.
Well, obviously there's the lore that that he signed a peace treaty,
Sure.
which I don't believe that, because I don't see why. I think the aliens signing a peace treaty with humans would be like us signing a peace treaty with puppies. We don't need to, so why would we?
Interesting.
But that was, as I said, that got me thinking about it and started to read and trying to look for credible sources of information. And the more I did, the more I thought, this is a really serious thing. There's something is going on, and there's too many, whether it's an Iranian Top Gun fighter pilot who engaged with the UFO over Tehran, with tens of thousands of people witnessing it, and and having all of his systems shut down every time he tried to attack this thing. And there's just endless reports like that, endless reports from credible military people, backed up by radar, backed up by corroborating eyewitnesses. And you go, well, all of these people can't be crazy.
Yeah. Are you surprised, to use parlance from the community, that these sort of different disclosures, that there seems to be zero resonance, that we're not out on the streets screaming or at least talking about this, I feel like if the 1980s version of myself, if you talked to the 10-year-old me and said, look, in 30 some odd years, they're going to let this out, pie-eyed and excited would have been an understatement. It just feels to me like, here it is. And yet, are we just too busy to care? What's going on?
No, I'd say one of the things as I got into it was that intrigued me the most is that it's a really great case study on how effective social engineering can be. And it's the thing is, it's not like it's not a big conspiracy thing. It's just that social engineering works. Creating an environment where there are things you do talk about and things you don't talk about is as old as human society. And as I said, Noam Chomsky wrote about it in Manufacturing Consent, which is a term borrowed from, and I'm blanking on his name, basically an American who basically invented public relations, and I forget his name now. He invented public relations and propaganda, modern propaganda, and his theories were quickly taken up by the Nazis, but also by Madison Avenue, so the effectiveness of social conditioning, and so the CIA put the Robertson Panel together, and they basically put out a template for what they wanted to do, which was a program. Basically, they decided that we can't do anything to stop these UFOs from showing up. So what we need to do is stop people from talking about it, because we can't we're powerless to defend the public against these things. So we need to get them to ignore that they exist. And they said, well, a program of debunking and explanations and character assassination and ridicule. And they even outlined how they would incorporate mass media, radio, television, print, movies, that they would reach out to these the media, the entertainment industry, and try to get them on board with mocking, ridiculing, and diminishing the subject. And and as I said, Chomsky, you sort of wrote that if you want people to, not talk about or think about a subject, you create an environment where sensible people don't take this seriously, he applied that in later years, even, to things like what's going on in the Middle East, that we just create an environment where we only look at certain things. At least sensible people do. And so with the UFO thing, that was it. They just created an environment where sensible people don't talk about it. The media came on board with that, because people, it's a scary thing, and I think you can exploit people's desire to just not think about things that might be scary, and they did it so effectively that even in 2017, when the front page of the Sunday New York Times, as high profile a news outlet, I mean, maybe not as much as it used to be going back to the 70s, say, but still as pretty much as high a profile a news platform as you can get is the front page of the Sunday Times. And they put out an article saying UFOs are real. The Pentagon admits they're real. Oh, and here's some videos of UFOs taken by the Pentagon, taken by the military. And here's a former Pentagon official, Lou Elizondo, who has been running a UFO research program secretly called ATIP. And what the Times didn't report was that there was also a much larger government program called OSAP that was also studying UFOs and related phenomena. So that happened, and almost no ripple effect in the culture. To the extent that, especially amongst, as I always say, especially amongst my sort of political cohort, the left, the intellectual left, the least impact on us.
Because they're the most interested in being representative of sensible people, as you keep referring.
Yes. And, as I always said, as I said, Chomsky also said basically the easiest people to manipulate are intellectual elites, because they don't want to be outside the group. They don't want to fall afoul of the community. And so it's So I know friends of mine that read the New York Times, cover to cover, and I said, and I was talking to them about, this program, the secret UFO program, and these videos, and they all, what's that about? When did that happen? I go, well, it was in the New York Times. I didn't see that. And it's not that it's not like they just didn't read the article. Their consciousness was incapable of perceiving that the article was on the page.
Yeah.
And that's the world we live in, where we can be so manipulated that we just don't even engage our senses to observe something that we've been conditioned to not observe. And it's also and it's been going on for so long, and it's maybe just now breaking down. Maybe, but it's still, again, we had a congressional hearing with 3 incredibly credible witnesses, to be contradictory in my language, who came out and said, we had Ryan Graves saying every day for a 2-year period we were encountering UFOs and it was interfering with our training. You have David Fravor who said, "Yeah, I chased a UFO off the west coast of the United States, and I couldn't get close to it. It was vastly superior to anything I could do, and it broke the laws of physics." And then you have David Grush, who was hired as an investigator for the UAP task force, and over a 4-year period encountered 40 witnesses who gave him credible evidence that there was a UFO retrieval and reverse engineering program going on that had been in a lot of ways buried in private industry, and that government funds were being illegally diverted to these illegal programs. And he, as I said, and he went through the legal processes of trying to do a whistleblower complaint, and was deemed his complaint was deemed credible and urgent. And again, at least 30 of the people that he cited who had firsthand knowledge of this stuff have also testified privately, confidentially, because everything he's talking about is still, he can only talk about so much without going to jail. So he comes out, and all people have to say is, "Oh, it's just hearsay," and everyone goes, "Oh, great! I don't have to think about it."
Yeah.
The newspapers, the media, the television news channels, they hear, okay, thank you. I don't have to talk about it or think about it. But anyone with an ounce of intellect can make the distinction between hearsay, saying, "Oh, he just heard this from a friend," or a friend of a friend said this, or a 4-year investigation by a trained intelligence officer. There's a qualitative difference between that and hearsay.
Yeah.
So those are kind of the things that, and it's our willingness to shut off our minds from things is one of the things that intrigues me the most about the phenomena.
Yeah. And to be honest with you, it's one of the things that intrigues me about all of these sort of forbidden conversational territories. Like when somebody says I'm not allowed to say or do or think something, I mean, maybe it's because I'm a high school dropout. Maybe it's because I'm a natural contrarian. Yeah, well, hey, Dave, I'm somebody who's in the business of ideas. You're somebody who's in the business of ideas. So when an idea rolls around, I know that it does sort of feel sometimes like there has been promoted a feeling that new ideas should be feared first. And I'm just not afraid of ideas in the same way that I'm really not afraid of words. And so I'm very interested in interesting people, especially people who have a natural curiosity. In fact, sort of one of the brand archetypes of human that makes me the most uncomfortable is when I'm around somebody who is not curious. I'm like, it borders on psychopathic to me. So ideas for me, I'm very excited. Knowing that you're a longtime atheist, and I feel like I've been cycling through a lot of belief systems in the last little while. I grew up going to the United Church as a kid, and my parents weren't pious or by any stretch, but
that's barely a church. Yeah.
It's barely a church. Yeah, I loved the singing. I loved the stories. I loved it. As I get older now, I'm trying to reconcile a lot of where my spirituality fits, and it's oddly enough, it is through the discussion of some of this esoteria that gives me a more interesting place to lay my spiritual pieces down as they relate to possible off-planet species or altered or species from other dimensions. The clear and empirical evidence of the fact that there are technologies existing on this planet as we speak that are probably not human, or definitely possibly not human. I mean, you and I come from the 1970s and 80s where the idea of space travel and space beings was more or less being minted and sort of paraded out before us as kids. were we prepared for this, do you think, uniquely, coming from this time in the late 20th century, that we were imbued with so much space talk and space lore that here it is, and we're a generation that's prepared for this kind of messaging? Or
I think that's definitely true. And the question, I guess, the question is whether that was part of a plan or not, or whether it was just a cultural phenomena. But yeah, I mean, look, I'm just old enough that I have memories of when 2001 was released, and not because I didn't see the movie, but everyone was talking about 2001 when I was a little kid. You know, and people were talking about the monolith and talking about, and I remember as, in 1970, adding up figuring out how old I would be in 2001, and going, oh, that's pretty old, but I guess I could still enjoy life then. I guess I'll still be able to appreciate what's going on at 37. And it was like, and then of course, then I also grew up watching Star Trek and loving it, and then Star Wars came along, and or for me, more importantly, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and I also, as an old movie buff, loved movies that were like The Day the Earth Stood Still, which really isn't a UFO movie; it's a Christ movie. It's a Christian parable. So all of these, I think we're definitely, it's in our cultural awareness, the idea of aliens. But I think, but still, I think most people are willing to, I think it actually, in a sense, made it easier to dismiss the real evidence of aliens, because we could go, no, this is just people who are being influenced by fiction.
right.
These people they've just seen too many movies, and that becomes the argument. So we're in a way conditioned. We're conditioned to think about it, but then also conditioned to still dismiss it.
I feel like you're very well read. The several interviews I've listened to and or watched of you speaking within the context of this modality, you're somebody who's read the books, you've got the nomenclature, you've got the terminology. I've been invested in thinking around this subject and other sort of no-go zones for a lot of time. It's really hard to assemble the language. It's really hard to assemble a convincing elevator pitch on this stuff. There are so many disparate pieces. You're up against a wanton disbelief just to begin with, not to mention that, like I said, having a basis in the language, some of the players to be able to call up some of the names, some of the stuff that within the community, the parlance has been agreed upon for so long that, which is what I think is interesting about your podcast, is that you're looking to be a transitionary force from probably a zero to no understanding of the parlance and players into a sort of a starter course. Is that true? You seem, I mean, listening to you talk about it, I must say, like I said, I've never really outed myself, and so it's wonderful to see your courage and just a depth and the depth and depthness you have, or deafness, I should say, pardon me, with being able to talk about this stuff. Because I think a lot of it is, once you get past a few YouTube episodes, you run out of convincing material for the naysayer you're trying to convince at Christmas dinner, so which then it does no service to the overall picture. If you're looking to be someone who's out there convincing the doubters, and if you sort of only, if you're only, you have a primary preparation, but you can't go deep. It means in some ways it affects the potential convert's understanding or willingness to go your way.
Yeah, well, it's the thing. It's if you're too exclusive in your I guess your language and your approach to something, then people aren't going to be brought on board. I mean, there's so many like podcasts out there, and a lot of some really great ones, but then there's so many that are just fall into, and sometimes I know Tom and I have to keep reminding ourselves not to do this, where you fall into like an inside baseball mindset. You know, and as somebody who doesn't watch baseball, I know just how boring and how excluded I feel from it when people start going on stats and histories, and I go, I don't care. The game bores me, and so and it's so many of the podcasts are just people discussing the various factions within the UFO community and who they hate and who they distrust and who they think is worthy. And there's so much sort of, I guess what's the internecine fighting? Is that the pronunciation of it? I can never remember.
Not sure.
Yeah. I'm going to go with internecine fighting.
It sounds lovely.
All right. In the community. And Tom and I, probably because Tom was really new to it when we started this, because it was one of the things where Tom started approaching me because I said my interest in the UFO thing was always an intellectual interest about how people think about things and what is the real data behind the story. You know, and realizing, and then when I realized there is so much data and so much history and so many credible witnesses, why aren't we taking it seriously, right? So it was always that was, but then, once I engaged in the subject, like a year ago, January, I actually saw one.
Wow.
Which was, I saw it with my friend who I became friends with because I started speaking publicly about UFOs. I wound up becoming friends with a guy named Jeremy Corbell, who was present along with his mentor George Knapp at the congressional hearing, sitting right behind all the witnesses, and helped organize that event. And so Jeremy and I became friends. And Jeremy had also he had dedicated his life to researching the subject, making documentaries about it, but has never seen anything. And then one night I was out with Jeremy and we were walking his dog, and and I said, it was a beautiful night, starry sky. I was watching the commercial traffic in the distance, and I said, Jeremy, this would be a great night to see something. And like 30 seconds later, Jeremy goes, Dave, turn around. And we turned around, and there was a craft, an orangey gold craft off in the distance, pulsating with an orangey gold light, and on the front of it were 3 white lights that were also pulsating. And we watched this thing circle the valley we were in until it got right in front of us, and then it hung in front of us for about a minute. I think about a minute, but it's hard to judge time in that circumstance. And then it went behind the mountains, and neither of us spoke or did anything for this entire time. And it was silent and large and structured, and you could see the details of it from where we were. And it wasn't until it went behind the mountains that Jeremy goes, dude, that was a UFO. And so we saw something. So that, in a way I went, damn it. Because I know what the effect of that is. I know that suddenly I'm not a person looking at the data and looking at the facts and looking at the witnesses, and suddenly I'm a believer.
Right.
Which I'm not. I'm not a believer in it. I'm somebody who goes, it's like I'm not a believer in buses. I'm not a believer in airplanes,
Yeah.
I'm going, well, they're there. So, I don't, it's not a question of belief. But what were we talking about? But so I started discussing that sighting on Twitter because I thought, well, I kind of have to, because I know there's so many people whose lives have been harmed and who have suffered because they've seen things and they've been afraid to talk about it. And I thought, well, if I can do anything, I can just talk about it. That's not a big deal. If I can just be public and say, well, I saw this thing.
It's almost like if we sort of had a global sit down with everybody at the table, it would be hard to carry our petty differences along with a mind to the fact that we're sharing this earthly space with somebody, something, some other person, some other things. Like all of a sudden, does it not neutralize a lot of our human squabbles? Does this thing not sort of call us to be a better version of ourselves as we attempt to understand what aligns earthly creatures with the visitors who are maybe off planet or from another dimension? Like, again, this goes to what I can't believe hasn't happened already, which is us all waking up and having a bigger what discussion is ushered in after we look at the evidence and go, well, hey, this is happening.
Yeah, well, that might be part of why we're not supposed to talk about it, is because it might do that. Going back to the Cold War, I mean, you certainly didn't want to have any reason for, Americans didn't want any reason for the American people to feel brotherhood and shared, a shared destiny with the Soviets at that point in history. Reagan, who I'm not a guy I agree with much about, but he put that forward in the UN. If we were faced with a threat from outside, wouldn't we all realize we're human beings? And I think maybe we're just really reluctant to realize we're all human beings. I mean, it's the thing. You talked earlier about other esoteric stuff. Like part of the UFO phenomenon is it does take you into questioning so many things.
Yes.
And like I still remain an atheist, and I'm very reluctant to think of anything as being spiritual. But I've become much less of an ardent believer in the scientific method. I've kind of realized, but there are shortcomings to it. Mm-hmm. It isn't perfect. It's good at some things. And I've also become aware that, that there's a real strong possibility that things like consciousness aren't restricted to the skull.
Yeah.
Because there's just too much evidence for it. Again, like things like clairvoyance and remote viewing.
Yes.
And near-death experiences and reincarnation. And various psychic phenomena, they just keep happening. Mm-hmm. And as much as science keeps saying they don't keep happening, they keep happening.
Well, Dave, and honestly, it thrills me to hear you even say this, because, I mean, I feel like whether my Christianity has been imprinted on me through past lives, whether it's just been a strong force in this life, I would say that first of all, your thoughts on belief, dogma also kind of is a bit scary for me, and I think the more I know, the more I realize I don't know much at all. But I will say that within the context of this truth finding over the last 10, 15 years, it has strengthened my spirituality with some of this empirical stuff that's floated into our reality. It helps me feel that there's a magic in my life, that the 2,500-year narrative that was pitched to me as a kid in school with a neat middle and beginning is only a sliver of the story, and that the possibility that I'm connected to eons of intelligence, things going back to before the Ice Age, and that the specialness of what's happening on this planet should in some ways wake us all up to the excitement of being alive. Like, even my misanthropy is gone. My fear of death is gone. And it's a lot to do with an interest in these subjects. Whether it takes focus off of us as individuals. We've already said, well, why is it that we can't just come together? Why is it that we can't see that we share? I mean, even just wanting to discuss with you simulation theory and the fact that we as humans are inextricably connected through the ether and through the movement of cells, atoms, what have you, where there is no separation, but we seem to be forced into an individualized experience, which doesn't tell nearly half of the full story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's even when you have like scientists like Donald Hoffman, who's putting forward theories that that space-time is not fundamental, and that perhaps the only thing that is fundamental in the universe is consciousness. That the consciousness may be the a priori basis of all reality, which I don't understand at all, but I can repeat those. Those words without understanding it.
But you feel it in your gut, though, don't you? I feel that stuff in my gut. When I hear these big physics propositions, I go, it's hard for me to get an intellectual grip, but my stomach says this is where it's at.
Well, yeah, there's just, science has been great, and it's enabled us to do so many wonderful things and terrible things. And I love science, and I'm really interested in it. But I also go, well, about 15 years ago, science had to come out and admit, 95% of the universe is missing. And that seems like a fairly large oversight.
Right.
They realize that we can only come up with 5% of what should be out there, based on how everything behaves. And science was pretty comfortable with then just making up something to explain it. They just made up dark matter and dark energy. And it doesn't mean anything. They just made it up because they said it has to be there because of what everything is doing. But then you have like the UFO or ghost phenomenon, and they have the exact opposite approach, which is it can't be happening, so it isn't.
Right.
But dark matter must exist because otherwise what is happening can't happen. But so why not go look at something that is happening and say, well, even though it might seem impossible, let's try to figure out why it's happening.
One of the riskier things I feel like I talk about to people who are internal in my circle who are going to love me no matter what I think or say, that my feeling around some of the popular phrases that have been born in the last 3 to 5 years, which I'm uncomfortable with I'm uncomfortable with new, period, but I'm uncomfortable with phraseology.
That's the privilege of the elderly.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. And you're not even elderly yet, I am.
But I'm starting to get there. But that the notion that there is a group of people who follow science, or in fact follow the science, to me is it's a disarming feature of it. There's enough in that language morsel that I get uncomfortable around it for lots of reasons. One, I think it presupposes an image of a altruistic person in a lab coat with a pen, like a pocket protector with pens, and they'll work for nothing as long as it means science is getting done, and that we get down to the core of things through a methodical protocol that is not to be altered. And to me, this is because I come from a place of creativity. First, I know that the big ideas are mostly accidents, and so if you're ambling through a well-designed prototype or protocol, there's an excellent chance you're going to miss the big thing. We've already talked about that as it even pertains to Kids in the Hall. Had there been something rigidly methodical there, maybe the magic of Kids in the Hall would have been lost, or had it been subject to committee as well. So I think some of these narratives around science that have become almost a don't ask, don't tell feature to the it's a language inhibitor as opposed to do I feel that it opens up discussion. All of a sudden, this couldn't be serious science. This doesn't sound like it's being done by a guy with frizzy hair in a lab coat and a pocket protector. Again, that image of the altruistic scientist who would do it whether he was being paid or not. It's just interesting, the fantasy that predicates the systems of belief. And as I've moved through the discussions and the language that have emerged in the last 3 to 5 years, it's a landmine it's fettered with, or it's festooned, let's say, with little tricks and minds that you stumble over, these language features that are, I think, meant to confuse more than they are meant to illuminate, and meant to divide more than they are meant to connect.
What do you have to say to that? Am I crazy, or are you feeling this?
No, I think I know what you're talking about.
I know it was quite circuitous, Dave. Sorry.
But no, I think there's the notion that, look, here we have follow the science. Yeah, look, science is great at some things. Science is fantastic, and we all benefit immensely from it. I mean, science is great. Look, people might get mad about it, but you know what? Vaccines are awesome. It's like we go, yeah, science did it. We had a problem, and with like COVID, and science did a great job. They managed to avoid millions more people dying. Great. That's what science is really good at. Is looking at a problem and breaking down the physical elements of it and figuring out what to do. But we also live in a world where the two major fields of physics, astrophysics, macrophysics, suddenly comes up 95% short on what should be in the universe. And at the other extreme, we have quantum mechanics that most people who really study quantum mechanics acknowledge no one understands. Mm-hmm. We know how to apply it, quantum mechanics. We know how to apply it. We know how to build things based on it. We know how to make measurements based on it and have technologies that function brilliantly. But no one understands the core. The core of like what the wave function is still a mysterious thing that no one agrees on. So we have these two major branches that are very, on a practical level, really useful, that have huge holes at their core. So we go, yeah, right. So science is great and useful, but it is not perhaps the best tool for dealing with things that aren't replicable, that can't be studied from an observer's point of view, really. Because how do you, it's like, if the non-human intelligences are as advanced as we think they are, then us trying to study them through the scientific method is kind of as hopeless as rats deciding they're going to draw some real good theories about the people running the lab. Because the people running the lab, they got all the power and they can change all the variables at any moment. Mm-hmm. So the rats are never going to get a clear idea about what these people are up to.
Not to mention, again, like I can't help but be drawing comparisons to the kids in the hall again, where it brought more than just a new concept. It brought more than just a new, an elevated nuance. Like it was a fresh vantage point. It was fresh language. It was a lot of freshness. And I feel like even when I hear people talk about AI and if AI sort of, if left to go on its own devices as it sort of seems like it is right now, that its versions of how it prioritizes thought, what it sees as new thinking, like the limitations of what we're even able to contain in terms of axiomatic connections of ideas. There's even having this discussion with you, I was nervous to even go down this lane because I can't embody everything I would like to. I feel like I know a lot of things. I feel like I've read a lot of things. I feel like I would like to connect those things through a way that my stomach has already made the connection, yet I maybe don't have the language or the IQ to assemble these notions in a way that feels sturdy to me, that I could go and make a case for this, like I say, at that Christmas dinner table. Like, to me, I want to share some of this because I want what it's done for me spiritually, what it's done for me in terms of alleviating fear, of really putting me in a position of seeing that as, there's the one side of me that says, oh, well, as an individual, my life doesn't mean very much. But that's an older, more erroneous version of thought for me, whereas now I feel actually I'm part of a collective here. There's no such thing as, my oneness is a oneness with God and the rest of humanity, and our connection to this bizarrely impenetrable physics concept. Even hearing you just discuss that, that light speed may be moot by this point if we can if time space is foldable, if this geometric thing that we sort of have contextualized the space that we live in, that maybe we're just coming into some modalities to understand the fact that velocity, the idea of humans getting places quickly, that, we got to run instead of walk. Well, hold it a second here. This thought in and of itself takes us off the trail of what is probably happening with the universe being able to fold into itself, or the cosmos having an elasticity to it that means that the idea of physical travel does not exist. I mean, time and space in and of itself, once you start to let my silly bum brain here rest in that stuff, all I have is want for a spiritual connection to this, because it feels the bigness and the smallness are now getting more and more defined. Am I making any sense? Here I am attempting to try to put this into language.
Well, I would say, here's the thing: is if, and it's not just UFO people. There's a growing sense in the world of physicists that space-time might not be real. As a block thing. Space and time as one. Is inextricably one thing. That it might not really exist. It might just be an emergent property of the universe, or it might be just a product of consciousness. It might be something that we perceive because we bring it into existence. And if that's the case, if it isn't actually a real thing, and if distance doesn't even exist, and there's even the notion that, the holographic principle too, there's the notion that basically everything in the universe is really clumped together. And there's just this projection on an outer membrane that makes it appear like there's space in 3 dimensions, but it's just a projection. And these are physicists saying these things, So if these things are possible, it's one of these where you go, like people, again, comfort is the enemy, and so people are very comfortable saying, well, light speed is the speed limit, and then therefore nothing can travel faster than that, and so therefore no one could ever get here from another place, and it presupposes a lot of things. One that our understanding of physics is the end of physics, which is stupid. And it also presupposes that other people's, even if time and space do exist, that other people's concepts of time are different, are the same as ours. Because what if your view of time, what if you're a species that is, I'll call it pan-temporal? What if you exist at all points of time simultaneously? Then you could travel anywhere you want, and you're not saying, oh, this is going to take me a billion years to travel there, because you exist in that billion year time frame anyway. So you just go, and who cares how long it takes to get there, because you're experiencing all of time simultaneously. So it's our experience of time as the arrow of time, even Einstein said, was an illusion. The reality is an illusion. So if that's true, and if the past, present, and future all exist all the time, then it's not impossible that there are beings that likewise exist on all of those time frames. So we can't assume that a human experience of the universe is a universal experience of the universe,
or that we even understand the experience we're having, because we could be some of those intertemporal species that you're talking about. I mean, I've been reading a lot of Marcus Aurelius and bringing stoicism into. That's been a big part of how last year I really fell apart and needed to put myself back together in a way that was much more sturdy. And
I did too.
Oh, high fives, Dave.
it's investing in this thinking, and maybe the people listening to this will be like, oh boy, like, but I'm with you that the comfort way is a version. I've not ever really truly been satisfied with a lot of the things that have been told to me. This is how it works, and maybe that's why I ended up dropping out of high school. I had what I feel is, and I mean, you and I as artists and as self-employed people, like, we've had to have a deep belief in ourselves in order to kind of fumble our way through all of this. I think in some ways I still have a sense that my stomach knows best about a lot of things. It doesn't have an empirical knowing, but it points me in the general direction that I believe sort of is the direction of my destiny, and that it has truth wrapped into it. That gut has a brilliance to it that my brain just doesn't.
Yeah. No, I think, well, look, there's even, scientists are starting to, come to the notion that intuition is a legitimate form of knowledge, and,
Right.
And some people like Gary Nolan over at Stanford, he's even sort of trying to study the science behind intuition. And there's other people doing it too. That there may, we may be able to find structures in the brain that represent higher abilities for intuition. So it's intuition is a path to knowledge.
Yeah. I feel like as artists, and especially performing artists, you and I would have a relationship to improvisation that would, I think, make us good candidates, particularly to have intuitive muscles that have had a fairly good workout over these years.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know about you. That's how I see my entire career. It's predicated on that wisdom, which is intuition.
Yeah, well, look, telling a joke is largely intuition. Knowing what will be funny. I mean, I have an inherent ability to be funny, which might not be evident in this conversation.
But it's evident, Dave. Come on.
But I have an inherent ability to be funny, and then I combine that with years and years and years of practice and study, kind of, and learning my craft, and which made me more no at using that inherent talent. But it was an inherent talent, and that talent I think is entirely born of intuition, because there's no way. I mean, scientists keep trying to analyze humor, and all they really do is manage to make comedians laugh. Because because we can just look at it and go, oh my God, that is so wrong, immediately, and then just intuitively we know that what their analysis is wrong. So yes, and music too. Like how can you create music other than intuitively? Because you've got so few tools to work with in music. You've got such a limited number of tones that you can
100%.
use.
I mean, you're talking about the thing I'm thinking about most seconds that I'm awake is the science of this thing that lives inside of me that fascinates, compels, and directs me to put things into the world, ideas not new but maybe rethought or regenerated or filtered, and I have a belief that my ideas need to be heard, and my intuition drives that constantly. I think that if you're in the business of having the hood up on your personhood, I like to think of this eyeball that lives in my head. I try to pull it out of my head and look at some of. I feel like about 5 years ago, I had this feeling that I flipped the bird while I was driving or something, and then I really thought, heck, I thought I was in charge of my personality. If somebody said, my personality is of my own design, but then if you give the finger to somebody when you're driving, it's like, well, there was no forethought there. That was a trained response. As soon as you start looking at your personhood as a series of trained responses, where do these responses even come from? And are they mine? Were they put in here? Have some of them, is this part of a manipulation? Is this part of a propaganda thing? Is this part of what I learned as a kid that's a vestige of that, and that thinking hasn't been renewed? But
once I start looking under the hood at myself and the things I believe and how I react to stimulus through the day, I mean, I don't know how much of me is really me and how much of me has been there by my own design.
Yeah, no, it's a struggle to define those things. And I got to tell you, I actually, over the last year, I did a few rounds of ketamine therapy, which is sadly, it's the only legal form of psychedelic therapy right now, which is drag, 'cause it's such, ketamine's such a boring drug. But I did this ketamine therapy to try and deal with like a bout of depression, right? And it was, and I also had, I think my had therapist who said they thought I probably had more like PTSD than depression, and those are things where I did like 3 sessions, and then I kept thinking, this is sort of working, but it's not really working. And then after the 4th session, I suddenly had this. Because the idea of psychedelic therapy is that it's not that the trip itself; it's that it opens the brain up to neuroplasticity, that you can form new neural pathways. It breaks down old locked-in pathways of thinking, and the idea is that in between these sessions, you're supposed to like model behavior and avoid stresses that will get cemented in again. So I was doing that, and then after the 4th session, I suddenly had this very clear third-person view of myself and my own history and my actions. And it was the best way I can describe it is that suddenly I could see my own behavior in life, but I was now devoid of any need to defend that behavior.
Wow.
And because I could go, oh no, that was and a lot of it had to do with like anger that I really didn't, that I kept justifying. Sure, I was angry at that. And a lot of it was like really like dumb, like anger at, customer service people on the telephone, just ranting at people on the,
Mm-hmm.
And then, but then suddenly I'm going, oh, I can see that. But I'm not invested in figuring out ways I can explain that I'm actually a good person, even though I did that.
Right.
I can just go, oh, why'd I do that? That's weird. And now and even like over a year later, like all the sort of like that low level anger that I had all the time, that was also a fight or flight response to fears of, in my life, of fears of rejection and, and fears of people walking away and, and all of that was just gone all of a sudden. And, and it was in part about a biomechanical intervention to break down those locked in, circuits. And, and once they were broken down, and, because I've been in therapy since the late 90s, to very little effect.
Right.
But this intervention, suddenly I'm going, oh, I actually have insight that came from it. And not just insight, because it's not just a question of, all right, now I have this information, now how do I apply it, and how do I make use of it, and how do I change based on this insight? It was more an insight and going, oh, one of the things I have insight of is that it's gone. The PTSD that I had been living with from childhood and from relationships was just gone. I could still be sad and I could still get depressed, but that anger was gone. I don't know if that's makes sense.
Oh, it's big, Dave. It's really big.
Yeah.
It's very inspiring to hear this. I feel like I should let you go. You've been generous.
I've got nothing to do.
Okay. Well, then we'll close the door on this podcast very slowly, but just we'll start to wind it down.
Sure.
Because everything, I was nervous to chat with you because I wanted this chat to be as respectful as it should be, given how I think of you and what I feel your contribution to art and culture
the groundwork it laid for people like me and my cohort. And I wanted to make sure that this discussion, it was at the very least respectful of you and your work, because and like lots of people, there's things of you I know very well, like Kids in the Hall, and there are things I don't know that well, like Newsradio. I don't. It didn't come into my life in a way that made. I think I was living in Toronto, and I was one of those proud lefties who didn't have a TV. But I think listening to your outing yourself in this UFOlogy, what you're doing with the Really podcast, it's brave. It's given me yet again another. You've blazed a pathway for me that I can feel a little bit more comfortable about outing myself within these modalities, because, and maybe, I'm not sure, was the ketamine treatment, was that part of your being able to see that life isn't zero sum and you can be whoever the hell you want and you're allowed to say whatever the fuck you want? Because like,
I think that was always core to who I am.
It is. Eh?
Yeah, that was always the wanting to say, I think I can, those impulses I can remember clearly going back to at least 4 years old. I remember going to Sunday school and sort of just going, again, it was the same thing. I just sort of saw holes in things, and I kept saying, why isn't anyone else, aren't you guys listening to this?
Yeah.
And so I stopped going to Sunday school because those
are the absurdity equations, right? Like that's how absurdity works. It takes somebody's eye to go, they're telling me I'm supposed to think this when I see this, yet what I think when I see this is they're full of shit.
Yeah. And so I think that's always been a core to me. I think the ketamine more just like it relieved me of anger that came out of I growing up with my dad had borderline personality disorder, and then I managed to get into a relationship with someone who also had it, and then and I've just had a lot of sort of interpersonal sort of trauma in my life, and so it kind of got all that anger out of the way. That's what the ketamine did for me. All the other stuff still, I'm still basically the same person, but I'm just not not angry about stupid things, little things, and I'm not as fearful as I used to be. But but thinking about I was going to say, do you know who else is also? I just found out recently, because the other thing, once you start talking about this, you realize the number of people who are thinking about this and maybe not talking about it is immense. Like, people keep coming out. Like, it really is a coming out. It is like, but like, I just read recently on Twitter that like Ron Sexsmith has had a UFO experience.
Oh, is that right? I've been avoiding Twitter for my own sanity. I pop in them now and again, but okay.
Yeah. And I mean, I try to avoid reading most of it, but I have to use it as an instrument of my profession, But yeah, I didn't know this, but I guess Ron had a UFO experience like in 2012 that he was talking about, which was which I was going, oh, that's interesting, and Murray Hammond reached out to me from the old 97s. He's had UFO experiences and is going through his family, and it's just more and more people come out and talk about it, and so I think that's you'll find if it's something you get comfortable with talking about publicly, then it's startling how many people will approach you.
Yeah. I think that for me, it's just about moving into the space with humility. And you and Tom and your podcast have been very good to sort of say again, like, there are people with reservoirs of knowledge in this modality that they're the people who should be highlighted. And then you have a real grasp on things. And I feel like if I was let to go, I might even be able to be accused of having some grasp on this. But it's an infinity of reading and discovery, and also it's in terms of how you relate to your own self, your willingness to have an openness and to be constantly ready to feel like you're just cluing into something, and then all of a sudden the rules are being rewritten. I even feel that way within the context of these discoveries within the context within physics, simulation theory in particular. It's just one of those things.
Yeah,
I've had again. Like, I just feel like
something put forward by serious science people.
Yeah,
simulation theory isn't flaky people coming up with this idea.
No,
it's not stoners. Not stoners.
As much as for stoners, it feels like, man, finally something we can buy into. You know, it's like this simulation thing sounds exactly right.
Yeah.
I mean, like I said earlier, I have an innate sense that life is utterly magical, that it's a stupendous and remarkable and absurdly wonderful thing that we're here having this experience together, that we are up against narratives coming from a televised media or whatever. I'm having too many thoughts come all at once, but it goes back again to the Kids in the Hall's license that it gave to a generation of people to hold on, celebrate, and enjoy and love those absurd thoughts. Enjoy that the inability to fit in. Enjoy not being a joiner. I think that's another thing, is that it seemed like not a joiners club. Even though it was a 5-person band, you were against the world. And I think for people like me who are not naturally joiners, who prefer to live in my own thoughts, that here I saw 5 individuals jockeying for position on TV in a way that felt handmade, and in a way that felt like it was coming from just down the street, and in a way that felt not only magical and timely, but I was lucky to be a teenager when you were putting images and thoughts of absurdity in the kind of way you were. I mean, I know we look at art and there can be, I was saved by Morrissey and the Smiths, which, you know, in theory I was, but I was also saved by Kids in the Hall, because you made my teenage life make sense, and by giving a context to that absurdity that made it feel like investing in this is just as real, authentic, and meaningful as investing in anything else that's coming your way from this television set.
Thank you. But then again, the Smiths brought back guitars in 3-minute songs.
Yes. You know, I can think about the perfection. Sometimes, you know, the idea of a band, because I was always a solo guy. I got into a band called Mounties, and then being in my little band, I understood, this is what I imagined was happening in the Police, for instance, where it's like these 3 people, or they're making music that couldn't sound any other way if you changed any of the personnel. And I think, again, like, there's something persuasive about a band in terms of the archetype or the narrative within popular culture. I think we buy into bands, especially in the indie modality, because it's like we buy into the relationships. We buy into the fact that, you know, 3 to 5 non-joiners found one another and are now sort of preposterously enforcing their individualist mindsets on us through the context of this entertainment product. I think Kids in the Hall was more or less a band, as I perceived it. I wanted to hang out with you guys to see what the inner workings were like. I mean, I liked the product, but I also knew that there was a depth of personality behind this that, as a teenager, gave me a sense that in the world, there are kooks that you're going to love and that are going to love you back. And the proof of that is that here's 5 kooks that love each other enough to hate each other some days, is from what you're saying. Mm-hmm. But that kind of love is the thing that you build great things on, which is what Kids in the Hall did.
We had I think we were 5 people who were temperamentally not inclined to be in a group, but found ourselves in a group that we couldn't escape from because I think we were all clever enough to realize, I'm better with these guys than I would be on my own.
Right.
You know, and some of us were more reluctant to address that, and some of us have only recently come to terms with it, to be honest with you. And it was... like I say, like, I'm certainly grateful I got to be part of that, and still am a part of it. And as you know, I'm a big fan of your work. So going back to when I first heard you on CBC radio, and I think originally thought you were Dave Bedini. Is that Dave Medini? I think it was you playing songs solo on CBC Radio. It was the first time I heard you. And then they said, and I thought, these songs are great. And then, sort of sought you out after that.
Well, thanks, Dave. I appreciate that. I'll wrap it up. I'll do the professional thing and let you go. It's been a real honor and a pleasure, a privilege indeed. And you've been very generous with me. We've slid through all kinds of parts of your life, and you've been open and thoughtful. And really, it's an honor. I'm grateful.
No, it's fun talking.
I don't know. I've run out of language on this.
Well, it's
Dave,
always fun. Always been fun hanging out with you. So hopefully we can do that again in person soon.
I'm going to invest more time in the new podcast. I recommend to anybody listening that you do that as well. I think that it's an important thing you're doing. And congrats on not resting, not becoming that intellectual couch potato that you characterized earlier. Bless you, Dave Foley. Thank you so much for being here. It's
Thank you, Hawksley. Thanks.
This is a real.
I'm glad I got out of bed today. Thank you.
Oh, goodness. I'm glad I provided the opportunity. Okay, well, take care of yourself.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers. Bye.
The Stumble Forward is an Isadora Media production and is hosted by Hawksley Workman and produced by Jennifer Kavanaugh. Be sure to subscribe and follow The Stumble Forward. You can support the podcast at patreon.com/Hawksley Workman. Thank you for listening.
Stumble forward, the star.